All right, in our third video, we're going to talk a little bit about injustice and environmental issues, which we talked on a bit last video. Here we're thinking about issues around social justice, race, and the way environmental issues disproportionately impact individuals. We're currently recording this lecture slide in the midst of a global pandemic, and one of the things that has come out of this pandemic is that we have seen that the disease and the virus that caused it have disproportionately impacted families of color, Latino families and Black families. There's a number of reasons why this are. Those folks are more exposed to it because they tend to occupy those jobs that force people to be in contact with others. But a major issue is what we call environmental racism. This means that environmental issues disproportionately fall and impact communities of color and poor communities. This image is fairly stark. We see a large chemical manufacturing in the background of a children's playground. It's fairly typical for high polluting manufacturers to locate near poor neighborhoods. This is because those poorer folks likely lack the means in terms of both money and contacts and social capital and time to try to resist such location. This means that the air quality in poor neighborhoods is often poor. They also tend to have things like older cars, which put out more pollution. Poor folks have to find different ways of heating, sometimes burning fuel. This is certainly true in globally in places like India, where people have to burn wood and other kinds of fuel, which can be more toxic. This means that people of color tend to have harder and more difficult time breathing, for example, because their lungs have been impacted by the pollution in the air. Now, this is kind of a trippy slide, and we'll get to one that maybe is a little bit more comprehensible. But if you actually read it from right to left, part of what this is showing is how white folks, in particular, are one of the main polluters, essentially. We meaning I'm part of these white people, put out more pollution than any other racial group. And what this does, if you follow from right to left, from the racial groups to the end use to the emitter, we're following who's using it, what use it's being used for, and how it's emitted. So for example, we see that white, that big line there to shelter, means that more white folks are spending it on their homes. Our homes actually tend to put out a fair amount of pollution. And then the emitters, you can see in the maps, are showed in different maps. So agriculture at the bottom, we see that what we're looking at is the particulate matter in the air. And we see the areas in which it's most heavily impacted. And we might know that this is measured in the thousands of deaths per year attributed to premature death from pollution. So agriculture is a big one in the middle of that section there. And the top, we see biogenic, wildfire, and international sources are a big one all over the country. Maybe this one is a little bit clearer. So what we're looking at here is essentially emission of polluting particulate matter, and the degree to which different racial groups cause those emissions and are exposed to them. Basically, essentially what we see here is that Black and Hispanic folks are exposed to much more, and both above the population average and above the amount they cause in terms of particulate matter, whereas white folks cause more and are exposed to these particulate matter less than others. So again, this is an example of how white folks are, because of wealth, because of extraordinary consumption, actually cause more environmental damage than other racial groups, and other racial groups are harmed by it more. So hence, environmental racism. We see other kinds of environmental racism, and simply looking at the environment in terms of climate and ecology and land. We've mentioned before that in many, I'm in Virginia Highlands, recording this right now, which is where people would go in the summer in Atlanta, literally higher land. There is the Hill neighborhood in Augusta, which is again up a hill on higher land and has these fancy mansions. Um, Part of this is because this is where wealthy people would go when it got hotter. It's higher land, fewer mosquitoes, and a little bit cooler. But this also means in places like New Orleans, when hurricanes hit, that the poor people are left in lower lying areas and tend to be more susceptible to things like floods and natural disasters. One of the things we're going to think about in our discussion board is, why does capitalism make environmental issues so hard? Why is it so hard in a capitalist society based on for-profit production and private ownership and control of companies? Why does this make it so difficult? Why does a system based on constant growth, for-profit, profit is growth, make dealing with environmental issues problematic? And how do we address it? We don't have much time until we get to those 2 degrees that cause catastrophic change. So what are some ways we can think of addressing this issue through policy and through mobilization?